After weeks of anticipation, the trial of accused Boston Marathon bomber Dzhokhar Tsarnaev began today in South Boston, and there was no shortage of security outside the John Joseph Moakley Courthouse. While inside, the defense and prosecution made their opening statements and called their first witnesses. WGBH News special correspondent Emily Rooney was there as it all got underway.
There was a lot of anticipation at the Moakley Courthouse this morning as the media lined up in masses, waiting for the principals to arrive. Lawyers, witnesses, and of course, the victims. More than a dozen victims and their families were bussed in. Among them, dancer Heather Abbott, who lost part of her leg, and the parents of 8-year-old Martin Richard, who was killed that day. Then, after more sidebars and motions, opening statements began, with the prosecution laying out the gory details of what happened Marathon Day 2013 and the days that followed. Federal prosecutor William Weinreb said Dzhokhar Tsarnaev is a terrorist whose mission was to maim and kill. He said Dzhokhar's computer was full of terror plots and instructions on how to build a bomb out of a pressure cooker. And he described in brutal detail how the 3 victims died, saying one bomb tore large chunks of flesh off Martin Richard, who was just 4'5", weighing 70 pounds. To almost everyone's surprise, defense attorney Judy Clark said they would not dispute the government's account of what happened that day. But she said Dzhokhar was under the influence of his older brother, a special kind of influence, dictated by age, culture, and sheer force of personality. She said it was Tamerlan who bought ammunition, pressure cookers, rubber gloves, and that it was Tamerlan who shot Officer Collier, and Tamerlan who pointed the gun at a hijack victim and said, "I just killed a police officer."
Emily joins me on set now, along with Andy Thibault, a legal researcher and writer who was also in court today. My first question for you two is, can we stop calling him the accused Boston Marathon bomber now? Because his attorney basically said today he did it.
She, in very forceful language, she said, we're not going to dispute the basic facts as laid out by the government. She said he was there, he carried a backpack, he planted a backpack, he got into the car with his brother, talked about what happened over at Cambridge, that he did not dispute one bit of the government's facts except, you know, the undue influence part of it. So,
okay, so Andy, what do you think? Can we go with, as Emily's saying, can we ditch accused for the rest of this segment?
It's on the record now, absolutely. Right. Judy Clark also went into some detail about the injuries suffered, with some empathy. And,
the injuries suffered to the victims or to, okay.
Yeah.
All right, now, my impression from following this on Twitter was that the prosecution tried to paint a picture of Dzhokhar Tsarnaev as not a young man enthralled to his older brother, but as a cool, calculating terrorist. What were some of the details they offered that helped craft that narrative?
Well, I thought Weinreb's opening was very well written, very tight, very factual, and compelling.
What kind of details made it that way?
Well, like, for instance, the stuff that was on his computer. I mean, that's going to come out in much more detail. I thought that that's some of the stuff that we learned in acute detail that we didn't know before. What kinds of stuff was on the computer?
So what kind of
the
things
volume. Were on the
computer?
Well, he didn't spell it out, but he said, you know, even like how to build a bomb out of a pressure cooker. But he talked a lot about Inspire magazine, and which is a.
Is this the Al Qaeda magazine?
Yes, and how to recruit terrorists, how to become terrorists, how to influence terrorists, and it was Dzhokhar's, it wasn't Tamerlan's. So he was making the point that despite the fact that Judy Clark wants to say that he was under too much influence, that they were co-conspirators, they did this together. You know,
not being there in the court, the detail that really hit home for me was the revelation that shortly after the attacks, I don't remember how many minutes, that Dzhokhar ran to the Whole Foods in Cambridge to buy milk.
That was a stunning detail.
Which doesn't sound like someone who, I mean, if he were, if he'd been pushed into this by his brother, you might expect him to be wrestling with the enormity of what he had done, and going to make a milk run doesn't really suggest. And not only did he
go and get milk, he went out, he bought it, and then left, and then went back into the store because it wasn't quite the milk he wanted.
Oh, really?
So he switched it out.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, remember, he sent that, I think it was a tweet out shortly after the bombing, saying he was a low-stress kind of guy. All right, well, that sounds like a real challenge for the defense then. Andy, let me ask you, there was some really, really graphic detail. We heard some of it in Emily's setup piece, but some stuff that I had trouble reading. talking about the people who were killed in the marathon bombing attacks, how they died. And also there was a video, right, shown by a man who happened to be there, a tourist from North Carolina, that captured in gory detail some of what happened to people who survived. How did that resonate in the courtroom?
Well, there was a 5-year-old boy who had his head on his mother's leg or lower leg, and I think he has a permanent injury of baldness on his head. And they showed photos of the mother's leg ripped apart.
Yeah. Her bones lying next to her.
Yeah, she spoke. She spoke. The victims spoke with great poise and feeling. The one who followed the mother with the 5-year-old kid talked about bleeding out and worrying about her mother.
I think the Corcorans, the mother and daughter, were both one. The mother lost both legs, and the daughter lost one.
Yeah, that was. I think there were people with tears in their eyes, even in the reporter room for that.
How did those details affect Dzhokhar Tsarnaev? Did he seem to register at all the stuff that was being recounted?
Generally, he tends not to face anyone who looks away.
You can't see him.
Really?
No, his back. Like yesterday, he was facing us for the first time because he was looking at
I remember you saying that.
For the trend. So, but today he's back looking at the judge, so his back is to us. But he's been unfazed all along. So my question was, how much of this detail did he know, or was it new to him as it was new to people in court? You know what I mean?
I do, yeah.
I wondered if he knew every detail.
What about the victims who were there, or the victims' family members who were there as these details were being recounted? I saw that Martin Richards' father had a very hard time. I believe it was when the injuries that killed his son were being recounted. How did they seem to hold up?
I wasn't.
I was in the court. He's in the overflow. Sorry, I was watching them.
All right. So Emily, how did
at one point Mr. Richard got up and left, and I thought, wow, this is just stunning. But I think it was just a quick restroom break or something, because he came right back. But some of the others you could see later on. You could see him putting his hands in his face. I mean, it was very hard. You know who was also there was Carlos Arredondo, who was the one who saved Jeff Bowman, and he was just riveted. I spoke to him briefly afterwards because I said, hey, were you stunned when Judy Clark said he did it? He says, I just couldn't believe it. It just blew me away.
So given that Judy Clark stood up there and said, we concede that our client did it, what was the explanation she offered of why he's not just pleading guilty?
Well, he was under the domination of his big brother.
But I mean, why not just make a guilty plea, and then when it comes to the sentencing phase,
then they lose their chance for appeal.
Well, she basically is saying he wouldn't have done it. That this is all concocted by the big brother. He wasn't that kind of a kid. As you can see here, he was just a college kid. He wasn't like that. It was him who was like that.
But the judge reined in the defense, right? Because the judge says there are strict parameters. Okay, so what?
Meanwhile, she gives them strict parameters, and then she completely ignored it as far as I could see. She started laying out the whole case based on the fact that the poor brother was.
All right. So as this keeps going, then what are the parameters the defense is supposed to adhere to? What will the judge let them argue about the influence that
that is
Tamerlan
very unclear to me. How about you?
Well, there are conspiracy charges, so they should have the latitude to talk about the role of the conspirators.
Okay.
However, they're not supposed to talk about mitigating factors, but those two again, right? Those two principles intersect, though.
But she did cut him off when Judy Clark started talking about his parents and this struggle and moving here from Russia, and then the judge said, cut it. So she did have to move on after that.
All right, Emily Rooney, Andy Thibault, thank you both.
All right, thanks.